Hello and welcome. So there's some fantastic videos on YouTube and also elsewhere already on these two lenses, but the reason I'm making this one is just to give you some really quick fire information of my findings. I am a professional photographer, so it's quite an informed view, but there's a lot of places like they've got sample photos, incredibly lengthy videos you may wish to wade through, but this is really just saying my views, and I'm trying to keep it non-biased and just going bam 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 and tell you all the details. Okay, so first I'm just going to talk about the lens hoods of these two lenses. So the Sigma is better because it clips on much easier, and also with the Sigma it locks in place, which is fantastic. It's incredibly sunny day, so I don't know how well you can see that, but you need to actually press that to be able to release the lens hood. However, the downfall for the Sigma is that it's got this, and a lot of people mention this, it's very unusual rubber. So this is now incredibly dusty, and it's just putting dust everywhere, which is a real bugbear. So for me, I'd rather the slightly cheaper, more plasticky lens hood that does the same job, but without this rubber feel. I'm not quite sure why they've gone for that. The other thing I wanted to talk about is the lens cap. So the lens cap on the Sigma, unless you've really perfected an art to it, takes you about 10 goes to get the thing back on. As I'm demonstrating. So that, and actually if you're a professional in the field and you want to quickly, I normally leave mine off, but if you want to quickly put them on and off, that's a real problem. The Sony 100% hit rate goes on first time. So also, if you're quite particular about your material, the material of the Sony is fantastic because the lens matches perfectly with the body of the A7R4, so it's quite beautiful and it looks very professional because it flows together well. The Sigma has done this really tough metal casing, but it's so shiny and very stark black. It's really obvious that it doesn't really fit the idea that Sony were going for. So if you're particular about things like that, you'd want the original Sony one. Also, there's the optical steady shot on the Sony, which the Sigma doesn't have, and that is a bonus, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so if you want to crop in at all, you might as well just buy the Sony, because the Sigma, it only goes up to 70mm, as I'm sure you're aware because you're watching this, but even if you want to go say 90, 100mm, the cropping in from the Sigma gives you significantly worse quality, even in very good conditions, compared to the Sony. So you might as well just go for the Sony if there's any reason you're ever going to go more than 70. Also the Bokeh. The Bokeh was a really interesting one. The Sigma actually doesn't perform consistently, which is really unusual. So the Sigma, as you probably know, the brand has a lot more circular bokeh than the Sonys ever have. The Sonys are a lot more creamier, and it's definitely typical here. So the Sigma is very circular, and the Sony is very smooth and creamy. So that's open to opinion, but the problem I found with this Sigma lens, I do own others and they don't do this, but this Sigma lens, not only is the bokeh a good circle, but the problem is sometimes the middle isn't the same focus as the outsides of the individual circles of the bokeh, which is really unusual, and it's very odd. So instead of being a solid ring of that colour, you're getting a stark outside to the ring and a very unusual middle, and that's really not on. That's a problem, because you couldn't sell photos like that, and consistently with the ones that I tried from Sigma, all of the 24-70s were a problem like this. Okay, so the other question I was asked is, can it be used for macro? So on paper the Sigma is better for macro because you can go in much closer. In reality it's not the case. The Sigma isn't as sharp when you're doing those really close images, and if you just stand slightly further away and zoom in more with the Sony, plus it having much sharper image, and it is much sharper image anyway, you might as well have just used the Sony. And that's been really consistent across the board as well with the types of lenses that I use. I used a variety of different ones of these from different companies as well, so it's quite an informed decision. The distance, you obviously know that you're going to be better off with the Sony, because the distance will you know, go by the cropping in that I said earlier. Obviously Sigma make other lenses which can go a bit further, but on the distance the Sony's always going to win when you're at the maximum 70 range of the Sigma and the maximum 105 range of the Sony. The Sony is just all round a better performer. How about the wide angle, someone said to me. So the Sony is more in focus when you're at the 24mm. Even in excellent conditions, same f-stops, keeping everything the same ISO, the Sony wins, and it's quite an outright win. I tried it on a tripod without the steady shot on, just on the lens. I've used the steady shot on the body for everything I'm talking about. I've never taken that off. So for the lens without the steady shot, it was better on the tripod. But that doesn't matter because the Sigma doesn't have steady shot inbuilt anyway as an option, so that made it even a fairer test. When I put the steady shot on and I was doing landscapes with the Sony, it wasn't very happy. The edges weren't quite as sharp, so I'd keep it off in that case. Everything else I left it on for. So someone else asked about what about fast moving objects? So the Sony was better, even in low light. Even with the low light, Sony was better. It was faster, it was more sharp, it was less grainy when I had the images, even some that I shot at higher ISO with the Sony, which is really unusual because obviously the Sigma can go down to the f2.8, so you'd expect, and then you can lower the ISO, so you'd expect that to be less grainy, but it wasn't the case. The Sony outperformed it every single time. And for the fast moving objects, it also got 100% hit rate of locking on to birds in flight against the clear blue sky. The Sigma, even when I had it either centre spot or wide, or you know, the different types of metering, the Sigma was undecided and not constant. I don't mind a lens which doesn't perform well, but it has to not perform well in the same way, so I know how I can use the best of my abilities to change that. But the Sony was just on it every time, no fail. And a few final thoughts. So after editing, I got 100% hit rate with the Sony. I took about 4,000 shots in total, so I took perhaps 2,000 with the Sony. I got 100% hit rate of them being in focus and being very usable for me. The Sigma, I got about a 40% hit rate. A lot of that was also because I tested it out at fast speeds. I felt it was too grainy. Some of the edges weren't great when I did the landscapes, so it was quite clear for me. And I tried multiples of these lenses too, so yeah, it was quite obvious for me that the Sony is going to be the winner. I've always been a Nikon user anyway, until 4 days ago, so I have a lot of experience of Sigmas. A lot of my professional lenses are Sigmas with my Nikon D850, but it's the Sony A7R4, never had anything like it. It's so quick to focus, it's absolutely phenomenal. So my Nikon kit will be going, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately for my clients and for me. It's more fun to use the Sony. And then a really interesting final thought. Someone had asked me, what about for general use, for someone who's just doing it as not a particularly serious hobby and just wants it, because if they're quite affluent, wants it as a nice expensive camera to use for their family photographs and their family events. So without editing, the Sony gives better colour, which is, I think, quite important for people if you just want to take it and you leave it on the auto setting. The Sony lens gave much better colour, and the Sony lens also performed better in a variety of lightings. I have a feeling the reason for that is because it's a native lens, the camera reacted to, when it was low light, it reacted better and gave it really precise settings when it was using a lens by the same company. When I was indoors in some low light, I was kind of pretending it might be a wedding, you know, in the dark, you know, some disco lights and things like that. The Sigma would need a lot of manual setting up. And for this question particularly about just general use for someone who's using it for fun, you know, the Sigma would not be a good bet if you were going to be doing parties in the evening or some social events in the evening, which slightly lower light and some different lighting as well. Little picky things, if you're going to buy the filters will be cheaper for the smaller area you've got. So here the filter size you'd need is 77, Sigma still, despite a lot of people complaining about it, they still don't print their filter size on the actual lens. So if you leave your cap, like a lot of professionals do, if you leave that somewhere, you need to look and you're like, yeah, I really can't tell. So you have to look on your lens cap. So the Sigma is 82, and obviously that's slightly more. Got it. So the Sigma is slightly more expensive when you use those filters. So through the filters as well, by the way, because I do have an 82, I tried it. The Sony then was even better, because through the HD filters that I use, they're professional quality, but the Sigma just slowed down even more. The Sony didn't even slow at all. So that's my view. I hope it was helpful. If you would like to see some images, you're more than welcome. I have images of everything I talked about, but I really wanted this to be quite different from the other professional YouTubers you've seen do this as a living. This is just my thought as a photographer. I just wanted to share it. It might help you save a bit of money, and I did test multiples of the lenses from different companies, so I really feel like I'm giving you a decision which isn't biased and was definitely based on facts. So thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely day.